Now, the number tonight is starting to focus a little bit on what happened in the course of the year. You know, we just have a few weeks to the end of the year. So let's take a look at this report that was released by Article 19 East Africa. And it's called Protest Principles Report. And what they do every year is they take a look at the number of protests in the country. Now, this year, 2016, and this is not counting the month of December, there have been 175 protests in the country. This is up from last year's number, which is 140. Now, we'll get to the reasons why, and I'm sure you know why we had more protests this year. Now, they've even gone down to break down the nature of the protests in the country. 124 of them were peaceful, 51 were violent, and in total, 111 persons were charged with this, including 12 deaths. Now, let's pause here for a moment while I put this into context for you. Now, if you recall, Article 37 of the Constitution guarantees the right to protest. In fact, it is protected, respected, and must be fulfilled. Now, during this year, especially when you take a look at these 51 that were violent, there was a lot of talk about police and how they handle protests. That came into sharp focus. If you will remember, it was the IEBC protests at the start of the year, particularly in Kisumu. We also saw some of the officers themselves who were allegedly injured during those protests. And it started to talk about, what is the standard operating procedure for policemen when quelling a riot? At what point do they start to use tear gas canisters and, indeed, live bullets? Now, you also remember the man named Manono in the green sweatshirt. Whether or not his identity could be proven, what was not in doubt was that thorough beating that he received on the streets of Nairobi. If you also take a look at another one where the police came into question, was the IDPs in Nairobi who were protesting outside Parliament recently. They were allegedly beaten by security officers and taken away from the CBD. Now, the focus also shifted on those who are organizing the protests. And you'll remember this year, the question came up as to whether those organizing the protests should ensure no violence and vet those who are taking part in the process. And a protest is a public event and anybody is free to join. So these were some of the issues that came up and that led Article 19 East Africa to come up with guidelines on how to manage protests. Now, if we take a look at the nature, this was whether they were peaceful or not, but what were the protests really about in Kenya? Now, we've just picked the top 5 or so. Of course, the top was elections, 22, and you know what that yielded, amendments to the IEBC Act that are currently in force. In fact, we are currently looking for new commissioners to replace. So a good number of them happened because of elections. There were also 20 protests in the country out of the 175 based on security, 18 based on corruption. Considering corruption has been such a huge conversation in this country, a little surprising that there were just 18 associated with corruption. And then other protests to do with land, 19, and education at 14. Now, those are the recommendations from Article 19 East Africa. Number of protests going up this year, 175 from 140 last year. Will there be any in an election year 2017? We will wait and see. That is your number tonight.